expand a little bit on today's event. Because I know yesterday we talked about, in great detail, preparation when you deal with crisis. I mean, who doesn't want to be prepared to deal with those kind of intervention aspects, conflict resolution, etc. You want to be ready. And I don't mean ready like, let me look in a book ready. No, I mean ready like right back here in the brainstem ready. You know, it's got to be so ingrained back here that you're ready to click as soon as it starts to happen. So we talked about that yesterday, I believe. And I think we also talked about trying to articulate that to your folks, communication-wise. If I have a crisis, how am I going to give the guidance? How are we all going to try and measure up, you know, the mission at the end of the day? Get that put out to all corners of your organization. So I think you talked about that. I think, again, got pretty good buzz that was connecting by all our speakers. Good things. Today, we'll take a little step further. Now, I hope you recognize when you looked at the pamphlet, you go, let me see, they're talking about ethical dilemmas, they're talking about stress, they're talking about preparation. These didn't just come to us in a dream. I mean, we do believe in these kind of core themes when you start to think about leadership, and specifically when you're talking about crisis situations. These matter. You better get these figured out. And I'm not saying you can't, this is a learning process. You're not going to get them all figured out today and tomorrow. But these are some themes that take them back with you. Go to your great institutions, have some more dialogue when you get back to your place. And if you got some after you think about it, call us, because we'd like to hear about it also. So today, not too hard to figure out stress, how you deal with it in a crisis situation, and also quickly some moral dilemmas that are going to pop up. Now, if you don't mind, because again, I'm just going to go quickly. The panels are going to talk about those today. But let me just go backwards to number 2 first. And I'm a big, big, big believer in foundation. I mean, because we've all seen those sides, job application. Yes, you're wanted, 5 years experience required. Well, I don't have any experience. Well, then you can't get the job. Well, that's the wrong answer. But what you can do right now, when you're studying and discussing and having dialogue with all of your folks in your organizations, you can think about those foundational building blocks that will never change. I don't care if it's, your institution is 200 years old. You better not come off these pillars about being a great leader. And you're going to hear about them. And if you ever for a second let them start to crumble or peel away, why don't you just check out? Things I talk about, ethical behavior, moral behavior, conduct and character, things here and in here. You don't need a lot of experience for that. You just need to know one thing, that you're going to make the right decision based on the right moral values as a leader. And let me just peel that back for one more second. For you Marines and sailors out there, because I've been there and I've dealt with them a lot, and I love them. Oh, by the way, it's also about trust in an organization. If for a second, a sailor or a Marine, or you pick your organization, a worker, a colleague, can't trust you, that in the heat of battle, in the heat of a crisis, will make a moral, ethical decision that will benefit the organization and you'll see right through them. I guarantee you, you lie to a sailor or Marine once as a leader, once, they will look right through you, and you might as well just check out of the organization, because you will never get their trust back again. Never. Now, that's not hard. You don't need to get experience for that. You just need to be the person that will make that correct moral decision. Just don't do it. Don't cave. That's what I'd offer to you. When the pressure gets hot, just stick to your guns. Stand tall. Stand for something. Because really, if you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing as a leader. So stand for that. Don't let that ever crumble away. So you'll talk about that a little bit today too. If you didn't figure that out, I'm pretty passionate about that one. If I didn't mention honor, it's all about being an honorable individual, that your folks, your sailors, your Marines, your workers, your colleagues, they can trust you. They know you're doing the right thing for the organization. You have calm confidence in the heat of battle, and you'll make the right decision for the team and for them. The other one that's hugely important, we'll talk about that a little bit today, is stress. And again, that goes back to that, hey, you need 5 years experience program. That is a little harder, because you can't really experience the stressful scenario unless you've experienced it. And this is where I have to kind of plead with this group out here. And this is where I've been hugely impressed. I mean, I talked to people from Penn, UNC, Penn State, Stanford, Texas A&M. They're all over the board, everybody here, and everyone's been trying to work, RPI, areas where they're using internships, club leadership activities, service activities. You pick one, you're trying to put yourself in a kind of realm and environment where you can indeed work some of that leadership and you can maybe work some of that stress. But let me kind of highlight the stress part, okay? Leadership, it's easy, Mitch, it's easy to be the best leader in the world when things are going great. Oh, I'm the best leader in the world. Look at this place. Everything's just clicking. That's not leadership. Leadership is on the tough days when everything's going right down the toilet. Can you keep it together and keep the organization moving in the right direction to meet the mission? That's leadership, friends. That's stressful environments, and can you deal with it? Now, why do I say this? Again, when you go try and find that internship, when you try to go abroad, when you try to go find a club activity to help support your development as a leader, don't pick the easy road. You know, you can't go to McDonald's and get leadership for $1 on the value menu. You can't do it. It's not there. I'll take that, thanks. No, you got to earn it. Put yourself in some stressful positions. Even as you develop as a young person, give it a shot. I didn't tell you you're going to do it right every time. That's part of developmental, and that's part of learning, right? That's what that is. So I challenge this group, when you leave here and when you get ready to go do an internship somewhere during the summer, a job training kind of evolution, a club activity, a service activity, don't pick the happy, just feel good at the end of the day. It was easy. We had punch and cookies together. Yeah, you need to do that. But also take the hard road. Challenge yourselves. Make yourself better. That's how you become that leader you want to be. Clearly, everyone didn't come here for Easy Street. You can go down to the JC down the road and get that. You came here because you want to lead this country and you want to be future leaders. I recognize that in talking to every single one of you. God bless you. That's why you're here. I picked up on it like that quick. I am inspired by you all. And as I look at my watch, and it's time for me to leave, as we get ready to do the panel, I will leave you with this one comment. And Tom Brokaw, who I do love as an American, hit it. He hit it right on the head. But guess what? He only hit part A. And there was a midshipman of mine that stood up and offered part B. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. My dad and my mom, my father's not with me anymore, he's up there. But he was part of that greatest generation. He truly was. He gave his life, his heart, and his soul for this country to make it better, not about him. This is what I challenge you. And I know this group. I have 4,500 of them that I love and I sit with every day and work through problems every day. This generation, you, the people right here, don't let Tom Brokaw tell you that is the greatest generation. I challenge you. You take it. You take that title. You doggone it. This group right in front of me, you make a doggone difference. Okay? You want to stand up and say now that you want to be the greatest generation, then do it. Go out there and do the hard jobs. Don't sit by idly and be some just lackadaisical leader. That's not what we're talking about. There is crisis, folks. There's crisis right now today in this country, in this world. And I'm not just talking about the U.S. Branch out. Help this world. I'm talking about humanity. This is the time to take it. I know how talented you are. I know how you can touch the world. Reach out. Connect. Then do it. Now, I'm sorry. It's early in the morning. I just had my coffee. But this is the second day. This is an important conference. Don't lose this opportunity for you all to network. Do exactly. If you want to be the next generation that can get us through these doggone problems. And trust me, every day I think about them. Think about it. World poverty. Our conflicts and clashes of civilizations and all our cultures. Let's get that right. You can do it. I know you have the talent and the energy, and you can do it. I have great faith. Don't let Tom Brokaw the next time he stands up and say, the greatest generation. Let him say that about you all. Let this generation be the greatest generation and make a doggone difference in this world. And I hope today when you have these two panels and you start to talk about these issues, ask the hard questions. Don't let them get the easy questions. I don't want a single softball thrown up there. You make them earn this panel. and you have them come back. But I want hard questions, I want hard answers, and I want you to help us get solutions. Thanks for being here, folks. I know we got a big day. We got a big day tomorrow. Now you can calm down, or I can calm down. I know we're going to have buddies tonight for dinner, and I know you're going to have a great lunch lecture by our senior lawyer in the Navy. It should really be a tremendous day. And I know tomorrow we got another opportunity. And also, I know Mitch is going to talk a little bit today, but don't for a second. I know we did it at the icebreaker. I know we did it last night at the post-reception. You know where we have those discussion periods for you all just to exchange ideas? This is it. This is the time. Don't waste it. Get together. You know, colleagues together. Hook up. See if you can come up with ideas for the future, for today, for tomorrow. All right? Can you promise me that? We're very happy you're here. I love you all for being part of our Naval Academy family. Thank you again, folks, and God bless you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel entitled Stress and Crisis, Physiological and Emotional Challenges. In the midst of crisis, human beings exhibit a variety of psychological and physiological responses, among them which include panic, fear, and confusion. Often these responses lead individuals to behavioral extremes. For example, individuals can become indecisive and fail to act. Yet when a crisis occurs, followers and the public look to leaders for guidance, motivation, and prudent decisions. To help us address questions around stress and crisis, we have gathered a distinguished panel. Rear Admiral Kraft is the Director of Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance Capabilities Division within the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, N2, N6, Information Dominance Directorate. Over the course of his career, he has accumulated over 3,700 total flight hours and over 1,000 carrier-arrested landings. Colonel Hughes presently is the Executive Officer to the Secretary of the Army and commanded an infantry battalion from the 101st Airborne Division in Iraq and a brigade in Central America. He is also the author of War on Two Fronts, an infantry commander's perspective in Iraq and the Pentagon. Dr. Carlson works at the Department of Psychology at the University of Kentucky. His research and clinical interests over the past 25 years have focused on the management of pain and anxiety disorders. Dr. Kraus is a senior faculty associate for the Center for Sports Psychology in Colorado Springs, Colorado. As a sports psychologist, Dr. Kraus specializes in helping individuals and teams to develop mental strategies that lead to consistent peak performance. What I'd like to do is to begin with our line officers to discuss how leaders overcome mental obstacles such as stress and fear and still effectively lead. And what are some techniques to combat and control the psychological responses connected to crisis situations? Next, we'll move on to the doctors that could further comment on these and other techniques. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to discuss these questions, followed by questions from our audience. Our first discussant, Rear Admiral Kraft.
Well, thanks, Doc. I appreciate it. It's great to be here this morning, and I want to thank the Naval Academy, and what a great paneler. I don't know, is it hard to be an infantry officer or work in the Pentagon? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Stress for me is fighting my way out of a meeting with a 3-star so I can make it to the Academy in 45 minutes from Washington today, but it is a thrill and great to be here. Tough act to follow, but with a comment, but I'll give it my best shot. You know, I've been fascinated with people like myself, how we react to stressful situations and how people handle that. I've seen some people excel under pressure, a lot of people, but I've also seen it humble, otherwise very confident people in the face of a stressful situation. So when I thought about stress, it really changes throughout my career and my life as I've gotten older. You know, I started off as a junior officer, and we all start off in the fleet, learning to become part of a weapons system, whether it's driving a ship, flying an aircraft, as I was learning to do, or running a nuclear reactor. You're learning to perform under pressure as part of a system. The good news is you're in control for the most part, and the decisions you make probably only affect you in the case of flying an aircraft or a small group of people. So the type of stress that you're feeling is very much an individual sort of stress when you first start off in the workplace or in the fleet. I'll give you one example. During my first tour, we were flying an aircraft called the A6 Intruder, not around anymore, but it's a strike aircraft. And we were getting ready to do a strike into Libya, known as El Dorado Canyon. You know you're old when a mid comes up to you and says that he did a history paper on that strike. It was back in 1986. I know you weren't born yet. You don't have to remind me of that. But what I noticed is that most of the stress tended to come during the planning phases as we were preparing to do that strike. I watched a lot of people spending a lot of long hours down in the Intel Center, and when we got reports that some of the modeling showed us losing maybe 1 or 2 aircraft of the 6 A6s on that strike, this really preyed on some people's minds and changed their behavior a little bit. Maybe I was too dumb or overconfident, but either way, there were definite effects on everyone around me. In the end, everything went well. We did our jobs in the aircraft. We survived to fight another day. But I realized later that it was mostly the anticipation of what we were about to do that was causing us to feel so much stress and anxiety, the wondering about how we would handle the pressure ahead. You know, once we executed the strike, kind of like starting a football game or doing a triathlon, the stress, the anxiety goes away because you're doing what you're trained to do. And when I was faced with combat situations later in my career, and there were plenty of them, what I always fell back on is I'm doing what the Navy trained me to do. I'm doing what's inside my personal skill set. And that helped with what I thought was the most stressful part, which was thinking about it beforehand, because once you got into doing it, it was a piece of cake. So I've talked about the first kind of stress, which was anxiety over something that you're going to do or some situation you feel you may or may not be able to control. The other type of stress is the kind should be familiar to any kind of type A person like me, anxiety about your own individual performance. Whether there's a test ahead or whether it was doing my job from an A6 or a written exam, I always feel like I need to ace it. My wife always tells me that the person who puts the most pressure on me is me and the level of performance that I try to reach. When I inevitably don't reach that level, or I make a critical mistake, I would agonize over it. I think a lot of us have those kind of high expectations for ourselves, and we don't meet this sometimes impossible metric that we set for ourselves. We tend to look inward and agonize and feel terrible about what happened. It's just not very worthwhile. When I got to the command level, when I commanded a squadron, later when I commanded an aircraft carrier, I learned about a different type of stress, which definitely gripped me more than the first 2 types of stress that I talked about here. I, on the bridge, was now responsible not just for my own well-being, but that of others. Whether you're leading a formation or driving a carrier around, people depended on me, and sometimes a whole lot of people. I did definitely feel that was really a very different kind of stress. So early in my career, I talked about how training helped me out to deal with that kind of personal stress. But later, when I had to really depend on large groups of people to do the jobs that I wanted them to do, it was a whole different feeling. And what I found was I needed to dedicate a little bit of myself and my own time to their education and well-being. I needed to spend time to let them know what my priorities were, what my standards were, and what I expected of them. If I set high standards and I demanded that of both myself and others, really I did it so I could sleep at night. So I could feel good that the people driving the ship around at night or running the nuclear reactor or flying the missions in our squadron's aircraft were doing what they were supposed to do, what they were trained to do. And that helped me feel a little better. And when I fail, when I made mistakes driving ships or flying aircraft, once again, everyone will make mistakes. You won't live up to your own personal standards sometimes. It really wasn't personal frustration or embarrassment I felt, like in my very competitive younger days. It was a feeling that I might have let the crew down, that I might have let down people that depended on me, and trust me, that was a much worse feeling than ever making any kind of personal mistake. So those things were stressful. I dealt with it, as I talked about, by setting standards, by focusing on training, but there were a couple other ways as well. Probably for me is physical fitness. Getting out for a workout really helped me file things away that might have happened during that day, or kind of take the edge off my demeanor so I can deal with people in stressful situations for the rest of the day. Keeps you on an even keel. Another thing I found, and when I noticed my own personal stress level kind of going up, was to sit down and try to look at, okay, Crafty, what is it exactly that's stressing you out at this moment, and how can you face this problem, embrace it, and try to move on. Try to turn something that can be destructive into something constructive, and chocolate was always a good choice for me as well. Finally, I noticed that leaders I respected rarely looked stressed. I appreciated the fact that despite obvious challenges or disappointments, they were able to look on the bright side, not shoot the messenger, and press on with the mission at hand. Throughout my career, I've remembered that, and I've tried to emulate that kind of behavior as a leader, both for people, for everybody that has to work for me. As a leader, I look for people that can handle a stressful situation, but I understand the last thing they need in that stressful situation is that stress might be coming from me. So thanks, and I'll look forward to your questions later.
Thank you, Admiral Kraft. Our next discussant is Colonel Hughes.
Thank you. Is this thing on now? On, isn't it? Thanks. The PhDs up here will take care of us combat guys. Thank you. Talk about stress and not have enough experience under your belt to sit up here with this distinguished group. I appreciate the opportunity, and Admiral, thanks for your words. One of the things I've done to deal with stress, I'm doing right now as I'm sitting here, probably over the last 20-some years. I've been in the Army for almost 27 years. About the last 20 years, I decided whenever I was asked to do something like this, I wouldn't think about it until the moment I'm do it. And that way, the words would roll off my tongue in such a way that they actually had some sort of meaning from my heart. And so as I sat and listened to Captain Klunder a few moments ago, it got me pretty fired up. And he reminded me of a quote, and I've only had one quote that I've ever put on the wall of my offices. I've rarely put any of the I love you or I love me stuff up on the walls to show the accomplishments over the years. But I've always had this one quote, and it's by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and it says, the ultimate measure of a man is not how the individual behaves during moments of comfort and convenience, but how they react to moments of great challenge and controversy. And that's exactly what the captain was talking about a few moments ago. It is very easy when the ship is going the direction it's supposed to go and the planes are landing when they're supposed to land. But it's the leader in the organization that has to have the commander's mask, if you would, of absolute confidence in what's going on when things begin to go astray. And that's what we all try to strive for in the military. It's not too different in the civilian world for those of you here from the other universities. Although we all up here in uniform appear to be the only thing we do for a living, I also ran a chain of stores in southwest Iowa for 7 years while I was a major because I was bored. I didn't have enough to do. So I bought a chain of stores for $1.2 million, and I ran it on my off time while I was going to the Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and enabled me to buy a few things that my peers didn't at that particular time. But that was also a very stressful thing to take on, to deal with and delve into the civilian world. In the Army, we're encouraged as professionals to take risk outside that of what you're comfortable with. Thus, I have written a book. It's a kind of a scary adventure for a non-academic, but written a book and actually won a few awards with it. So those are the kinds of things we test our young officers and our young non-commissioned officers to do, is to push yourself to your limit in areas that you're uncomfortable with. That has been something that has served me very well. In the Army, as within the other services, we have our different value sets. They're not just bumper stickers or propaganda. They're designed over years and years and years of experience of dealing with stress, dealing with combat, dealing with a profession where every day, no matter what you're doing, there is a level of loss of life that's potential if you fail to do the right thing. For us in the Army, we call it leadership, but it's loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And on every officer's fitness report, those words are across the front. And if you have no in any category, your career is over. Because as the captain also said, once the breach of integrity has occurred in our community, you will no longer have that respect. You can no longer function as a leader in our community, and you will no longer be trusted by those you lead. So absolute trust and confidence in each other is extremely important when it comes to life and death decisions. We teach all of our young officers to fail. Something that most of you in the universities is probably in the academies haven't experienced yet. I've been over here a couple of times to talk to some of the different classes at the academy. It's always a lot of fun to get a chance to talk to the mids. But one of the things that I always talked to them about was I had a colonel that I worked for when I was a young lieutenant who had 6 tours in Vietnam. He had 3 Silver Stars, 9 Purple Hearts, and he also eventually won the Distinguished Service Cross. When he took command of the battalion, he was a relatively old man. By our standards, he was 30. He had been in the Army for 31 years. It was at the end of his career. This officer told me one day that I'm going to teach you by letting you fail over and over and over again until it's so burned into your gut that you hate to fail that you'll never fail again. And what he did is he told the story of the lieutenant. He said, every time a second lieutenant sat down in front of him, he said, there's a door right there, and it's shut. Lieutenant, get on the other side of the door. And the young AAA personality lieutenant jump up, run face right into that door, slide down the door, and get up. And the colonel looked him in the eye and say, what'd you learn about that door? He said, that's a very hard door. He said, yes, it is. Now get up off your ass and get on the other side of the door. And the lieutenant jumps up again, runs right into the door. This time he keeps his eyes open, slides down the door, and he says, well, what did you learn this time? He said, well, the door's brown, and it's very hard. He goes, very good, you're learning. Now get up and get through the damn door. Now the lieutenant jumps up a third time, runs headlong into the door, slides down, bumps his face on the doorknob on the way down, and gets up. He says, what did you learn this time? Well, it's a hard door. It's brown, and it's got a doorknob. And he goes, and what is your question? He goes, oh, I should use the knob. Yes, use the knob. That officer told me he would never have to tell me how to open that door again because I had learned how hard, what color it was, and the dang thing had a doorknob. And I looked at him and said, this guy is absolutely nuts. He's got to be one of these crazy Vietnam veterans who's got PTSD. But eventually I learned as I grew up that is the best way to learn is by failure. And that's my personal opinion. Some people may or may not agree with that. But I have learned over the years, and that is what happens when we put people through training. You train them, they fail. You train them, they win. If they win, they normally think, well, that's exactly the way I should do it again, and they drive on. And they only have 1 or 2 tricks that they keep with them for the rest of their lives, and they think they can solve a problem the same way every time. But if you allow young junior leaders to fail over and over and over again, you pick them up and you coach them, you teach them, you mentor them, and you let them know it's okay, they develop multiple ways to solve problems. And that is my opinion of how we grow young leaders, to have multiple ways to look at a problem. And that way, it reduces their stress level. If you look at a problem and the only way to solve it is to do the Hail Mary pass to win the football game, then, and that's the only thing you have in your bag, the enemy will figure it out and they will beat you. But if you failed a number of different ways to get across the goal line, then you have a number of options available to yourself, which reduces your stress because there's other ways to look at it when it doesn't work the first time. We call that resiliency training in the Army. We teach our leaders to be physically fit, as the Admiral has said, because physical fitness has a lot to do with your stress level and your body's capability to deal with stress. We also have mental stress. We put our junior officers through a lot of things to test them mentally, to see how well they can deal with that stress. We have things very simply called a mental fitness run, where we'll tell an entire formation, we're only going to run 5 miles today, and when we hit the 5-mile mark, we go on for a couple more miles just to see how many quit, in order to teach them that the goal is never where you think it's going to be, and you have to be able to exceed beyond the accomplishment of each mission in order to be successful. And finally, for all of you, you have to think yourself spiritually where you stand. And I'm not saying religion, I'm not saying belief in a God, I'm saying where do you stand as an individual? In your heart, who are you, what do you stand for, and what do you personally believe in? And that's a personal part of your resiliency of who you are at the end of the day. We have a saying that says, leaders take the hard right over the easy wrong. True leaders that people want to follow and believe in and trust take the hard right over the easy wrong, even when people are not watching. And that's when it's most difficult. when you know it's wrong and you walk past it and you do nothing about it, your gut should tell you if it's in the right place to go back and fix it, or go back and do something about it, or engage in it and don't let it pass because it's wrong in your opinion. That's what's most important about our leaders today, if they're able to do so. In my personal profession, in my experience, I have lost 13 soldiers in combat. I carry each one of them's card around in my rucksack that doesn't get too far away from me. It's in the seat over there. And I remember their memory every day. And not a day will go by between now and to the day that I die that I won't wonder, with those failures, what I could have done better to save their lives. But more importantly, those 13 failures are what keep me alive and try better at every single opportunity I can to prevent anybody else from losing their lives. Lastly, I'll leave you with, there's more to the training and the resiliency, and it's the educational piece of this. You're all in college. You have to learn your history. You have to educate and expand your mind. And the moment that you leave the academies or the moment you leave your institutions, you cannot stop your learning. You have to constantly read and improve and look at everyone else's example around you to continue to add as many different options as you can as a leader to exercise when you find yourself in one of those great moments of challenge and controversy. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Hughes. Our next discussant will be Dr. Kraus.
Good morning. I met some of the folks here sitting in the audience in the elevators. I saw some of the Virginia Tech folks working out on core last night. I've had a wonderful escort, Auden, that's been with me throughout the last day. And I will tell you this, being that I live about 20 minutes from the Air Force Academy where I do some work with the athletes, when I look at you young people, I do not worry about our country. I have a son who's a junior in ROTC at Gonzaga, and I'm very proud that he has chosen the military as his future. And I believe that someday one of you folks out there is probably going to be my boss. So thank you for that. As a sports psychologist, I get to wear several hats. I work as a faculty member at the Center for Creative Leadership, where we do executive development for CEOs, presidents of colleges. I had the president for Virginia Tech in my class, brigadier generals. And I also get to work in the athletic world. I work with about 13 of the Olympic teams, various collegiate athletes, and several professional athletes around the world. And I specialize in the concept of consistent top performance. How do you perform your best under pressure regardless of the stress you face? And I will tell you this, that there is a huge difference of how a consistent top performer mentally prepares compared to a marginal performer. The first difference is consistent top performers get the formula right, and the formula is this. Number one, the most important thing you must do is the hard work. I could make you a mental monster, but unless you have done the hard work, the repetition, the practice, develop the standard operating procedures, whatever I do to you won't matter. I had a golfer that was on his 5th try of making the pro circuit. The family had sacrificed a significant amount of money, and if he didn't make it this time, he probably was going to give up that opportunity. And when I started to work with him, and he was from the University of Arizona, so that'll give you a hint to who he is, I asked him this question. Tell me how much you practice. He says to me, I work at the Broadmoor Golf Course in Colorado Springs. He says, I can play anytime I'm not working. I said, that's great. That's a beautiful course. They've had the Senior Open there. They're having the Women's U.S. Open in 11. That's great. So how much do you practice while you're there? No, you don't understand. When I'm not caddying, I get to play. I said, no, you don't understand. I want to know how much you practice. Without the hard work, it doesn't matter. The second difference is consistent top performers learn the skill of paying attention to what they pay attention to, meaning they know how to pay attention to the self-talk. That's the tape that runs from here to here. And whatever you say to you, from the time you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night, every one of you is talking to yourself. Now, some of you, because of your extroversion, you talk out loud. And you are always judging and evaluating yourself. And all of your self-talk then forms pictures and images that you carry around in your head like a huge mental photo album. This is the biggest computer in the world. And in a stressful situations, those pictures speak to you louder and more clearly. So if your self-talk in a stressful situation that you're about to face is things like, I don't know if I can handle this, I'm not prepared for this, what will they think of me if I fail, what if, oh my God, this scares the wahootie out of me, I don't want to do this isn't going to be fun. I can guarantee you, physically you have butterflies, diarrhea, muscle tension. From a mental state, your focus gets very narrow and you tend to pay attention to the irrelevant things and not attention to the correct things. If your self-talk is, oh my gosh, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, that must be, I must be ready for action. I have prepared for this, I'm ready to do this, I can do this, I have game, bring it on, let's go, take action. You will be more relaxed, more fluid, you will know what to pay attention to, what not to, and you will be more calm. And in terms of leadership, remember the last syllable of the word leadership is ship. It takes a lot of people to operate a ship, and leaders need the support of their followers. So as a leader, you have to demonstrate calmness towards ever. The worst thing leaders do is when someone in their command is saying, I'm nervous, and the leader says, I can't believe you're nervous. What do you have to be nervous about? You shouldn't be nervous. That is so stupid. Now I'm nervous about being nervous. And the leader has just made it bigger than life. The leader has to demonstrate calmness. Anytime there's a crisis, the first thing any of us do is look at our immediate leaders. And if they're calm, we tend to be calm. When I first get on an airplane, I'm 6'2". The first thing I do is I walk down the tarmac, I bend my head to get in those small planes, and then I look to the left before I turn right to find my seat. And there's two things that I want to see in the cockpit. I want to see a little bit of gray, and I want to see calmness. And if I see those two things, then I go to my seat and I'm more calm. There was a major general that came through the Center for Creative Leadership in 1980 named James Dozier. And in 1981, he was captured by the Red Brigade Italian group. And he said because of experience at the leadership center, he learned how important it was to be calm because the behavior of the leader impacts the behavior of others. And James Dozier said, as the captures were bouncing bullets off of my cell and getting very hyper, I chose to remain calm. And the more calm I became, the more calm they were, and they treated me more civil. The other part of this paying attention, what you pay attention to, is a concept in the world of sports psychology called dominant thought. This is what it means, and then I'll explain it to you. Dominant thought means this. The very last thought on your mind before you begin an action, whether that thought is positive or negative, whether it is pessimistic or optimistic, whether it is reactive or proactive, will dictate how you perform, whether it be in your mind or your body. And let me put that in an example for you. Would you do me the honor of turning to the person next to you and just shake their hand and say, howdy, partner?
Howdy, partner.
That's not bad. I'm from the Rocky Mountains. We tend to say howdy, partner, but you're not bad here in the D.C. area. Now, when you hear the word partner, people usually think, friendship, win-win, 1 + 1, same team member, synergy. Now this time turn with your partner and using that wooden armrest, I want you to get into the arm wrestling position with your partner, please. Get into the arm wrestling position. Now here comes your instructions. You are going to get $1 million for you and your partner every time you pin their arm down in the next 10 seconds. Go. Stop.
We spilled.
Now, this is interesting. You know, when I said turn to your and say howdy, partner, you know, you were smiling. Howdy, partner. Good morning. Howdy, partner. And then I said get in the arm wrestling position. It was like, okay, wait a second. Wait a minute now. You be nice to me. And all of a sudden, now that you hear arm wrestling, you're probably thinking competition. I win, you lose. And then I said, you will get $1 million for you and your partner every time you pin their arm down. All you had to do was either go like this or this, but some of you stayed like this. Because the last thought that you left on your mind was when I said arm wrestling. And that thought created that kind of performance. I worked with one of our international sport teams, and I need to protect the sport here, and we were getting ready to go off to the Olympics, and we knew what would be our toughest game, and our setter had taken a dive and broken her face in 6 places, and everybody was a little concerned about that, and our back row player, what I observed in their performance is when the serve would come over the net, and obviously she would say, I got it, mine, and she went to pass the ball, and because she didn't use her legs enough, she got called for what's called a double hit in volleyball. And the other team got a point. And I'm watching her behavior, and I saw her kind of very nervously looking at her other 2 players and backing up, and I said to her, tell me what you were thinking at that moment after that mistake. And she said, in my head, the tape was, oh my gosh, please don't hit it to me. The other coach is saying, serve it to the same place. She serves it to the exact same place again. The athlete calls, I got it late, makes another mistake, and now the team has another point. And again, she's now praying, please don't hit it to me. You could just watch her nonverbals as she was waiting, that she was just really nervous, anxious, and if I could hook up electrodes on her muscle fiber twitches, she would be too stiff to make a good play. And when we met before the next round of games, which was the critical game in order to be able to qualify for the Olympics, I said, I want you to do me a favor. When you react with, oh my gosh, please don't hit it to me after a mistake, I want you to change that tape in your head. I want you to say this. You're going to make a mistake because we learn from failure, and that comes from taking risks. I said, I want you to say after a mistake in your head, that's not like me. So she went out in the first match, and she did that, and I said, tell me what happened. And she goes, well, as soon as I said, that's not like me, that same voice said, oh, yes, it is. You just cost us 3 points. And your body and mind tend to not lie to yourself. I said, I understand that, but you have brainwashed yourself for so long in a dominant thought of, please don't hit it to me. We have to now repeat and prepare and practice the language of, that's not like me. And I could tell the exact point where the change had happened to her body because she had made a mistake. And then the next time as the player got ready to serve the ball, she had her hands out and she was just like, give me the ball, I want the ball. And that came, thank you, that came directly from her self-talk. I look forward to answering additional questions from you, but understand that you control your self-talk. That puts all of the power in you to be more regulated in how you perform under pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus. Our next discussant will be Dr. Carlson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at your conference. Let's get this thing adjusted.
It's on right now.
I think it's on. Can you hear me all right? Good. I also want to thank those of you in uniform and those of you who are retired for your service to our country in this time of war. I want you to picture for a moment a lieutenant gunnery officer standing on the vessel of a ship on the deck with binoculars to his eyes. It's March 1943, up in the North Pacific near the Aleutian Islands. And in the binoculars, this young lieutenant sees a Japanese surface force appear. And it's very clear to him that the United States Navy is outgunned 2-1. And the Japanese command vessel fires the first salvo. And 8 rounds land in the water in almost a perfect shot group, 200 yards off the bow of his vessel. And what's interesting is what this young lieutenant said when that occurred. Man, that guy is good. When you're in a stressful situation, you want to be able to say the right thing to yourself, as Dr. Kraus pointed out, and be able to think clearly to come up with creative solutions to the challenges that are presented in front of you. And I believe the question of how do we control ourselves physically and mentally is a central piece to success when you're in difficult situations. You know, before I started putting this talk together, I sat down with a group of midshipmen for dinner on Saturday night, and I asked for their advice. I said, what do I need to do? And they said, well, there are really two things. Number one, don't say anything stupid. And number two, keep it short. Well, with that in mind, I'd like to share with you what I have learned in my professional life about how to think and act in the right way when you're under stress. But I want to talk to you as a dad. And the reason for that is my oldest, my son, is in Afghanistan at Bagram Air Force Base today flying an F-15Es. My middle child, my daughter Susan, will enter active duty Thursday evening as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force when she reports for duty at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. My youngest, Bethany, is in her third year here at the Naval Academy. And I have a vested interest in them being resilient. I had one of the most important pivotal experiences of my life as a young officer in the United States Army. And the military gave me a tremendous leg up in my life's journey. And I want them to have the same positive experience that I had. I also want them to come home from war and be able to live full and rich lives and have a family. What if I learned as a scientist and as a psychologist and as a dad about how to make that happen, about how to be as resilient as possible in the face of very difficult situations? Well, three things come to my mind. And the first is making certain that you're committed to what you're doing, that you have taken the time to think through what really matters to you, and you align your behavior with your priorities, that you believe in what you're doing. We know that people can handle tremendous amounts of stress if they believe in what they're doing. Commitment is essential to successful performance when life is difficult. And there's no greater goal to commit yourself to than a life of serving others. Secondly, I would encourage that you work for ways to develop control. Now, you can't control what happens to you in life, but you can control how you respond. And one of the most important things that I have learned about the business of control is learning to control your own breathing pattern. I've been watching a number of you breathe over the last day and a half. There is no more powerful way to control your physiologic responding than to learn to control how you breathe. If I were in your shoes, I would become a student of the mechanics of breathing and learning to use breathing to your strategic advantage. I would also work for other ways to develop a sense of control over what happens to you and in your life. You would be well served to figure out ways to control yourself. And I think Dr. Kraus gave you another great example of how to control yourself in difficult situations. Listen to what you say and control that last thought. The third thing I would be wanting my children to be cultivating is recognizing that you want to be able to reframe what happens to you in a way that communicates to yourself that you are challenged by what you're faced with. It turns out that how you look at life matters a great deal. And turning the events of life into a challenge, I wonder if I can do this, as opposed to, oh, phoop, there goes my day, because something drops into my life unexpectedly, and now I have to respond. I would encourage you to look for the challenges and to deliberately reframe what happens to you in life as an opportunity to see what you're made of, as an opportunity to pursue this experience as a way of learning how you cope and how you manage. When it's all said and done, my research, my professional life, and my personal experiences suggest that using commitment, control, and challenge can make a big difference in developing resiliency in the face of what might happen to you in your life. My goal is that my children are able to face life's most difficult experiences and be able to come home and to live full and rich lives. By using commitment, control, and challenge, I think it gives them a good chance that they might be successful with God's grace to return to their families and to return to life in a way that will enable them to live and to grow prosperously. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carlson. Now the panel will take questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Just wanted to, first of all, say thank you for all of you for coming. Your experiences and your professional knowledge is just outstanding, and I know I really appreciate it, as well as all of my peers here. We just heard a couple of great verbal pieces of advice. I was curious, what literary materials or what books would you just outrageously recommend for us to read? Because dealing with stress and leadership is probably something that is more learned than any other leadership quality or attribute.
Where are you from?
Oh, Allie Bentley from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Go ahead.
Nebraska, all right. I'll recommend one, and I saw Colonel Athens out in the crowd here, and the Commandant and I. When we were here at the Academy, a lot of our faculty, including the superintendent, were former prisoners of war from the Vietnam era. And if you can imagine actually getting to spend an evening with James Stockdale, in just a group of mids at a dinner, those kind of opportunities were unbelievable. So one book that had a great impact on me is called In Love and War by James Stockdale. It talks about his experiences as a Vietnam POW. If you want to talk about stress, being a leader in that situation at the same time you're undergoing torture, isolation, and all the things that go on in your head after years and years of captivity, I thought it was excellent. But it also focused on the point of view of his wife and the challenges that she faced at home. They kind of alternate chapters in the book. So I thought that was a great book to think about stress and leadership in challenging situations.
There's a couple books I would recommend. One is called If I'm in Charge, Why Isn't Anyone Following? And it's by David Campbell, who actually did a fellowship at the Air Force Academy, and he is one of the founders of the Center for Great Leadership. James Loehr, L-O-E-H-R. He was a famous sports psychologist in the field of tennis. Now he's opened up his own business to help business people be top performers, and he has a book called The Corporate Athlete, and another book that just recently came out. And then there's a book by Selman called Learned Optimism. And in this book here, he talks about, which I support, that, perfectionism isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means excessively high standards and critical evaluation, but there's optimistic perfectionism and there's pessimistic perfectionism. And there's some nice descriptions of the differences of those in that book.
Colonel Hughes, what's your book called? I didn't catch that.
It's called War on Two Fronts. And They brought it up, and I appreciate it, but all the proceeds for that go to the Fisher House Foundation, so I don't see anything from it. But I would recommend that you pick up one book. It's fiction. It's called Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer. It chronicles the lives of two individuals going through similar events through World War I all the way through Vietnam, and it's a tremendous story about leadership. And it also talks a lot about stress.
I would recommend Viktor Frankl's book, if you haven't read it, Man's Search for Meaning.
Thank you.
Over here, sir.
My name is Ian Leatherman. I'm a midshipman at Boston University. This is mainly a question for Dr. Kraus, but anyone can chime in, I guess, too. It's easy to get a new mindset when coming to a conference like this and have new challenges for yourself and think of ways to grow. But then at the same time, when you return back to your school and back home, it's also easy to get back into old habits. So what would you say as from your experience in your line of work, what's the best way to go back and keep that self-talk that's learned here at this conference and those new motivations and thoughts? How do you keep that when you go back to your regular life and get back to reality, so to speak?
That is a great question, only because, when working strictly in the athletic world, we will identify potential blue chip athletes for the Olympic team 8-10 years before the Olympics, and we have to sustain them from a mental side to train all those years. So I appreciate that question. And one of the more simpler techniques that can be very creative and have lots of variation to it is a technique that we call mental keys. Now, when you think about a key, you think about a key that gets me in my dorm, gets in my car, it gets something unlocked. A mental key gets this right here on the channel of how you want to perform when you're under stress. And let me give you a couple examples. So I worked one of our Olympic race walkers, and he came to me and said, I do that thing that most marathons talk about as I hit the wall at about the 18th mile. Now, they don't run into that brown door with the handle, but what they do is mentally they start thinking something like this. Oh my gosh, those are blisters on my feet and they're breaking. That's probably blood going through my toes. And my lips are all chapped from the dry salt. I just passed these people at 12 miles. Now they're passing me. God, I hate this sport. And I can guarantee you by that kind of conversation, their body is tensing up and they're running less than their most efficient. So I said to this runner, tell me how you want to feel while you hit that wall. He says, I'd like to feel a burst of energy. Then we need to find a mental key. Mental keys are pictures, words, images that are very clear and vivid about how you want to feel. They're never about technique. They're never about X and O's. They're never about instructions. They're a picture of a feeling because you behave according to your feelings. So we played around with this, and usually the more unrelated to the stress, the better the mental key is. And so I took him to the old Denver airport where you were allowed to go to gates at that time, and he had his race walking shorts and shirt on, and he got on one of those walking escalators where if you're just standing, you're supposed to stay to your right, and if you're moving to catch a flight, you go on your left. And he would get on the left side of this escalator, and he would do his race walking technique on that escalator. Now, when you walk on those things, they can move you pretty quickly. And he kept doing that over and over again. So now the moment in his race when he knows that this is not sustaining a top performance here, in his mind for about 10 seconds, he goes and gets on the escalator. I had a CEO that I worked with that under stress, he received feedback from others that he got very task-focused, got very short with people, became very abrasive. And when I worked with him one-on-one as his psychologist, he sat down and he said, okay, lady, you like pictures. I would say this to you. I have the interpersonal skills of a brick when I'm under pressure. And I said, well, and I have the data to support that, so why don't we get started? And without breaking confidentiality, one of the things that we got to is tell me how you want to be perceived under stress as a leader. He goes, I want to be seen as a softer, gentler leader. So on his desk sits a red brick from his fireplace. And on top of that is a roll of Charmin tissue paper. And it's just a constant reminder of how he wants to be. So whether it be a quote that you have on your wall, whether it be an image you carry in your pocket, you have to develop some mental keys that work for you to sustain the image and the feeling of how you want to be. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Ma'am.
Kylie Hamilton from the McDonough Leadership Program in Marietta College. Dr. Kraus, you spoke of practice and the importance of training, and as a collegiate athlete, my question is, what is your opinion on the importance of creativity in times of stress in correlation to attention to detail and fundamentals?
So let me see if I have heard your question correctly. You are asking, where does creativity come into play when under stress and trying to stay with fundamentals?
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm going to speak out of two sides of my mouth, okay? So on one hand, we know it's all about preparation and learning how to do things correctly. And there tends to be more of a correct way than not. On the other side of the coin, one of the things that all of our Olympic coaches have had to learn is that in order to get the best out of an athlete, they have to invite the athlete to be part of the process of training and use their creativity. And I'll give you an example. When Mary Lou Retna, who is one of our gymnasts, was now competing for the big gold medal and she was running down to do the horse, she was being overfed with lots of technical instruction where she was beginning to lose the feeling of floating and creativity in her run and on the Palmolive horse. And it was her coach that pulled her side, Bella Carolla, and he simply said 3 words to her: you go fast, you go hard, and you stick. Fast, hard, stick. And those 3 words gave her just enough framing around the technique, but it didn't put a lot of other words in her head that she just let the creativity flow. And of course, he meant, you go fast, you run down that mat fast, you go hard on the pommel lift, and then when you land, you stick. And those 3 words were just enough to give her the balance of structure, but total freedom. So you have to find those key words that's going to give you both direction and fluidity, because you have to have both to be at your best. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Ma'am.
My name is Desiree Williams from Hampton University's William R. Harvey Leadership Institute. And my question is directed towards Dr. Kraus and Dr. Carlson, but certainly all of you guys are welcome to answer. You all talked a lot about finding a sense of calmness in a time of stress. However, with my experience with sports psychology, we talked a lot about finding the proper balance and the proper level of anxiety. So the fact that complete calmness is not always optimal for peak performance. So I was just wondering if you all could discuss that a little more in detail about how to find that optimal level of anxiety in a time of stress and just in our everyday lives.
Dr. Carlson.
Well, you're absolutely right in that performance is a function of finding the optimal level of activation where you can do your best. My experience is that the problem is rarely under-activation. It's typically over-activation. And so the task is, how can I bring myself down from being too charged? And that's where I think the role of breathing plays a very powerful piece in your armamentarium of skills. Do you have the capacity to regulate how you're breathing and the speed with which you're breathing so that you can maximize your body's opportunity to calm itself down? The technical term for that is exercising inhibitory control. And far too few people understand the role of breathing in that process. And more so, they've had very limited practice in using the movement of the diaphragm as the primary muscle of inspiration rather than breathing with their chest and the muscles that are associated with chest movement. If you can learn to control the breathing through the diaphragm, breathing at a pace that will quiet you down, and we know what that pace is, it can make a significant difference in how you feel so that you're not too far over on the arousal side, but that you're at your optimum. That's the key, is being at your optimum, as you pointed out.
You know, I just met Dr. Carlson last night at dinner. He ended up sitting at my table, and we did discuss what we were going to talk about. But I'm in 100% concert with this idea of the proper breathing, because when you are performing, you're going to live in one of three zones. You'll either be in the flat zone where there isn't enough stress. You'll be in the zone where you just have enough stress and also the confidence that you're ready to perform in the stress, or you're in the panic zone where you don't believe you have the ability to compete in this. And it's a very fine tipping point to define the three. So yes, number one is the breathing. The second half of that is the ability to face the fear. And the technique is called acknowledge, define, attack. Very simple techniques. It takes about 10 minutes, and I'll play it out an example for you. It actually was done to me by my coach. I didn't know at the time it was sports psychology, but we were playing basketball. I was part of an Olympic team, and we were going to be playing against the Russians. Now, in when I was part of the Olympics, here's what happened. This Russian player, she was 7'2", and some of you may remember at that time there was a lot being written about. There was a Russian male player who was 7'8", and this Russian female player. Now this is what's interesting. I went out at went out to warm up, and I kept looking down the other end of the court, and we didn't do gender tests in those days. I don't even know if she was a she. I just knew that it wore a size 21 shoe, and as I'm warming up, this is what happens. I'm warming up. I kept looking down there in the court, and I kept watching this player, intercept passes with one hand like a vacuum hose, and dunk the ball. And my coach recognized that I was giving this other player too much focus. And the coach pulled me aside, and this is this technique that she did in about 10 minutes. She said, acknowledge to me how you're feeling right now, because the first thing you do as a top performer is you have to look in the mirror and acknowledge the feelings you have. You cannot run from Mother Nature. And I said, my God, I'm scared to death. Look at that thing out there. I don't even come above her kneecaps on the jump ball. And I said, I'm nervous because it's not just, our team. This is the United States. My grandparents are here. I'm really tense. I'm uptight. And I go through and just give her what I'm feeling. And then she says to me, define in detail what you mean. And that's when I get into more detail about, my gosh, this is the first time I've been on TV playing basketball. All my relatives are watching. I got this flag here that says United States of America. And I'm just defining what my fear is. Because the worst thing she can do is try to talk me out of my fear. My fear is my fear. Now, she could have left and said, okay, well, have a good game. And the dominant thought she could have left me on would have set me up. So the last part of that is attack. Acknowledge, define, attack. And the attack is both what Dr. Carlson is, the breathing, but the attack was also I had to get back in control, as he said, what my strengths were. And this coach just started asking questions, because that's what good leaders do. They ask more questions and give answers. And she says, well, what do you notice about her size? I said, Coach, she wears 100 pounds more than me. What do you mean size? I mean, my shoes are 12 and a half. They're this big. Hers are 21. And she says, well, what do you know about size? I said, well, I suppose I'm faster. And, oh, God, if I beat her down the court, who cares how big she is? So then I started getting excited. Okay, ask me another question, Coach. She says, are you going to be able to, shoot over her? No, ma'am, absolutely not. She goes, what could you do? I said, oh, I'll do head fakes where you go like this and the player goes up, and as they're coming down, you go up, because they can't change directions until they land. I said, oh, I'll just do head fakes, then I'll shoot. All right, good. What else? What else you got for me, Coach? And I started getting excited about the nervousness. And then Coach says, well, now, boxing out is where you're supposed to put your rear end into their stomach and kind of push them out from a rebound. And I said, I know what I'll do. I'll just box out one of her legs, the thigh, closest to the basket. And what the coach did was, first, obviously the breathing, and second, she had me acknowledge the fear, define it, and then attack it by me clarifying my strengths. We did not beat them in that game. I had a performance best against this athlete because I put back in control what are my strengths.
Captain.
Captain Bill Fell, Commandant, United States Marine Academy, Naval Academy, Class 78, a retired Marine Corps officer. Now, I'm going to be kind of selfish and ask a question to help me, Admiral Colonel. I believe in failure helps your leadership. And one of the things that I'm wrestling with is that sometimes I think at the academies we have a zero defect mentality for our midshipman leaders. And I just need some advice. How do you know when to really hammer someone for failing, and when it's a leadership failure to just keep them in the cockpit to help them to keep going? I think at where I am, we're like real quick to fire people for some failures that I think that they can learn from and be a better leader. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. My dad's a 51 grad at Merchant Marine Academy, by the way. What I remember most as a junior officer were the people when I made a mistake and I was ready for the world to come down upon my head, that didn't do that, that took the time to say, okay, what did you do wrong? How can we fix it? And how can we move on? And what I've learned being on the other side as a leader is once I cross that line and if I start to yell at somebody or berate them for their performance, you can look in their face and you're going to lose them. And the longer you talk, the more you lost them. And you'll never get that back once you cross that line and someone feels that they're being unfairly singled out or that you're making too big a deal about what may be a very minor error. So I think any leader would tell you that there's a school of second chances out there and that we probably wouldn't be sitting here at this table today unless someone believed in us and gave us that second chance. And the other thing I've found is sometimes the best way to lead somebody is to leave them alone. When I'm in the cockpit with somebody or when I'm up on the bridge, I can micromanage and worry about every single thing that person does, or I can let them kind of make a mistake on their own and then say, okay, what's your corrective action going to be? And it's great to watch those kind of things because you see people develop confidence as you go. I could go on and on, but that's about it.
Sorry, Admiral, I was working on my breathing. I'm pretty nervous to be up here. I've learned a lot in the last couple of minutes. I didn't realize I was doing that. And in all actuality, I think laughing and humor has a lot to do to control breathing. That's probably why we're supposed to start all these things with a joke and kind of loosen everybody up so they're breathing, not as anxious about the situation. And I guess that's, the school of second chances is very important. And it takes a lot of risk. You take risk when you let somebody fail, but you also personally as a leader take a lot of risk because they're your seniors that are also going to look at you and say, why did you let that individual fail? And you'll find that not only will that help that individual grow if you allow them that risk, but you gain their confidence that they trust you. And that trust is a two-way street. And so I learned when somebody took a chance on me, I became deathly loyal to them. I've got soldiers who I was on the verge of punishing them with Uniform Code of Military Justice and had it laying on the table in front of me. And just something didn't seem right, and they convinced me otherwise. Despite all the facts, I decided to tear it up and put it in the drawer. And those young men, in fact, I ran into one of them at the Sergeant Major's Academy last week who was a young corporal who I was about to destroy his career. I tore it up, put it in the drawer. And you would not find a more loyal, subordinate, trusted friend for the last 20 years as Corporal, now Sergeant Major Pinero. So I think it's very important. It's risk both ways, and you have to both take it in order to accomplish the mission. But I do want to talk one thing about risk real quick. Where's the young man who said, what would you do when you go back to your university? Where are you at? You still there? The doctor gave a great answer to your question, but I would tell you take a synchronized swimming class. You know why? Stand up for a second. Are you a swimmer? I mean, you're a midshipman up there, right? Yes, sir. Are you a swimmer? No, sir. Is there a synchronized swimming class up there to take as a PE elective? I believe there is, How many guys do you think are in that class?
It's Boston, so it's hard to tell, sir.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, University of Missouri, I can tell you there was one guy, and it was me, and I took it. Why would you take that class? Why would that challenge you as a leader?
Builds teamwork, sir, but also it puts you in potentially uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, how uncomfortable do you think that would be to be in there in them Speedos with all those girls in singlets who know what they're doing? Okay, I wasn't a very good swimmer. There were some pretty good-looking ladies in there. Okay, and eventually the fraternity realized my brilliance when they came to the show. Okay? A lot of lifting involved. You don't have to swim much, trust me. You just pick people up. And it ain't the other guy that's in there. He might want to pick you up, but you don't pick him up. But it's extremely uncomfortable, okay? And it's only you doing it by yourself. Challenge yourself to do something you would never think to do and become a better person for it. Take all the ribbing associated with it and know that you're doing it. Be A, you get it's a good solid A, trust me. Okay, it's probably a C if you just take the class, but trust me, if you're in the show, you get an A. Okay, that's the big challenge. And you do it in public, and you're comfortable with yourself. You challenge yourself, you put yourself at risk, and you walk away from it. And in swimming, you get to challenge your breathing too. Good luck with that.
Sir.
Malcolm Brown from Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. I just had a question. We've been talking a lot about how it's important for leaders to be calm in stressful situations, but how does a leader convey his calmness to his subordinates to make sure that even in a stressful situation that they're operating at optimum efficiency and get the job done?
Well, I think the Colonel hit on humor is one of the ways to do it. I'll go back to a James Stockdale story. He was at the prisoner of war camp. He had just arrived there, just been captured, and he'd heard about torture and other things that were going on. And he saw a guy being drug out from, obviously he'd just been tortured. He couldn't walk. He was being carried, kind of drug along the floor. And the guy who was being drugged kind of looked up at Stockdale and said, "Well, at least it's shore duty." But the ability to kind of laugh in the face of that kind of adversity, to me, I think is just amazing. And I talked to some people later who served with me on my ships, and they said, when we were going through that, when I was going through my head exploding with 30 surface contacts and 10 more aircraft to recover and those kind of things, I looked over and you were smiling or you were laughing, because you can disarm a lot of situations that way by kind of stepping back, taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture.
When there's so many things coming at you at once, there's always a good technique when you have time to sit down and write them all down and figure out which one is really the one that's bothering you. The other 14 are inconsequential. The humor piece of it usually helps give you as the leader the opportunity to take that deep breath and relax yourself and then do that quick mental test. What is the most important thing here? I remember specifically doing that one time on purpose because I was really rattled. I was in the Battle of Najaf during the invasion of Iraq. There were RPGs, as many RPGs as we had bullets that were being shot at us. And the only technique I could think of to get them to shoot the RPG so I could figure out where they were was to send a tank around the corner and then watch who shot at it, essentially making it a big RPG magnet, if you would. And so in my typical style, at the leading edge of the battle, I stuck my head around the corner as the barrage of RPGs subsided, but one still was on its way, and hit a doorway right in front of me. And in the moment of flash and confusion, found myself laying in the road intersection. I still had the hand mic from the radio that I was talking into. It had ripped out of the radio, and I was laying in the street, and I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing. And when I realized I was in the street and everybody was screaming for me to get out of the street, I ran back to the corner, and I looked at all the guys who were horrified that I was injured, and I said, "Well, that sucked." And we sat there for a second. They kind of giggled, and I said, "Okay, now what the hell am I going to do?" Well, I'm not going down that road. And we made a decision. We moved the other direction. But you always have to remember when you are a leader, whether you're a civilian employer or whether you're out, find yourself in a battlefield somewhere leading people in stressful situations, you are the beacon of how the unit's going to do. Right, wrong, or indifferent, no matter how strong the individuals are under your command, it's how you are perceived by them is how well they'll perform. In some circles, we call that the commander's mask. And when you are a leader, you have to learn that you have to wear that mask. And that mask helps you to control yourself by understanding that you've put it on. Once you take that mask off and you lose that ability to provide that inspiration to those you lead, then you need to get out of that particular operation, unit, or profession.
I have just a couple comments. One is a very valuable technique that leaders need to understand to help the troops be calm, the workers be calm, is a leader has to be accessible to those people they're leading. There's nothing worse than in a state of crisis and not have access to your leaders. So you've got to get out on the shop floor, you've got to get out on the ship deck, you have to be accessible to folks. The second piece is, storytelling is a very powerful leadership tool. And if you can speak from the head and the heart in terms of a story, people tend to see you as authentic and they want to follow you through the crisis. And the last thing is you've got to pay attention to your tone. There's nothing worse than for me to be at the sidelines of an Olympic basketball team and be watching a head coach saying to their players at the free throw line who is shooting the game point, winning basket, just relax, calm down. You have got to watch your tone. It is so important that you speak at the right speed with the right tone and have the eye contact so people can feel your calmness.
Sir?
Morning, Cadet First Class Doug Piper from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. My question, referring back to a famous U.S. Olympic moment when the men's hockey team defeated the Soviet Union. A lot of people fail to realize, that wasn't the championship game and still had to go on for another game after that. And how do you really, specifically, how do you think you push yourself to not be satisfied with where you are, what your results are right now, and to continue to, push forward past your current achievements?
That's a good point.
The mindset that most consistent top performers carry in their head is this: I'm good, I'm getting better, but how can I be the best? And when they get to the best, what do you think they do? They raise the whole bar again. So as soon as they arrive, they've never really arrived. And so there is a constant hunger for always wanting to be better. At the same time, in order to not burn out or to lose reality, those same athletes seem to be able to balance an appreciation for their current effort, and effort is the only thing in your control, and to deal with the fear of the upcoming competition. And that word fear is often viewed from the athlete's mind as, with the help of a coach, as false evidence appearing real. That spells out the word fear. So there's a balance between always raising the bar for the future, but at the present to truly appreciate and value the effort you just put out.
Yeah, I think I learned that pretty quick. You're going to graduate from the Coast Guard Academy, get commissioned, King of the World, then you're going to go learn how to drive a ship or go to flight school, and it starts all over again. In the military, but really in any career, you never stop learning. You never stop having, that bar set a little bit higher and have that next challenge thrown at you. So, yeah, when you accomplish something, you got about a minute to look at it, and then they're going to throw you in the next briar patch.
And I'll just add one caveat to both, is that when you're the leader, the good, better, best, as the doctor describes, you got to turn and look back at those that are following you, because there's another word called you have to inspire. You can personally say, I did good, I'm going to do better, I'm going to be the best in the world, but when you lead others, you got to take them with you. And you cannot attain any of those unless they go with you. Otherwise, you are a hollow or a false leader, and you're that person nobody wants to work for. And you got to look inside at the human dynamic and go, how can I inspire? It's like we work in the Pentagon where everybody is working from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night because we all feel guilty we're not out there with our brothers and sisters in harm's way. So we are just killing ourselves in the Pentagon working. And then I have a new secretary comes in and he wants to do something new and add to a bunch of people who already have their sleeves rolled up and who are exhausted. How does he inspire them to the next level? And that's something that takes a little bit of experience, but as the Admiral says, you've got to learn how others did it by improving your education and continuing to read about other leaders and how they've done that.
I would add something to the discussion, and that is the U.S. hockey team in 1980 had a coach who really knew what it would take to beat the best teams in the world. And as a young officer, I would find a mentor who can help you figure out the answers to those kinds of questions. I would venture to say that everyone on the panel, and Colonel Hughes mentioned an early mentor, had mentors that took an interest in their development. You have to seek those folks out, and you have to take advantage of them because they hold the keys to wisdom and success in your professional lives. I mentioned that lieutenant who was standing on the ship. I didn't mention the name of the ship, but that young lieutenant was Jerry Miller from the class of 1942. I had the opportunity to meet him several years ago, and I've enjoyed his company on several occasions. And he really has served as a mentor to me in this phase of my own life. I'm managing a large psychology department, and the challenges of leadership get really put to the test day in and day out in my world. It's not about life and death, but there are all sorts of issues that become a real challenge for me individually. And Jerry's insight has been really helpful to me. So I would encourage that you look for and cultivate mentors.
That's a great point.
Thank you. Sir?
Is this on? Yeah. Good morning. I'm Midshipman Second Class Wesley Darling from Maine Maritime Academy, and I'm a veteran of the submarine service. What I'm interested in, and we've begun to talk more about it as the questions have gone on, is during those moments of extreme stress when Colonel, an IED has gone off and you cannot retreat, or Admiral, a plane has crashed into the deck of the carrier. How do we continue to lead those around us when our unit is crumbling and we can't retreat? How do we, other than being a calm and assertive leader with nerves of steel, how do we hold those people around us and continue to throw them, into harm's way so that we can pull out? How do we deal with their stress?
In my profession, it's because I'm right in the front of it. And I'm the one that gets up no matter how badly I'm hurt. I'm the one that grabs the young kid next to me and drags him with me and makes him know it's going to be okay. And you lead from your own personal example. That's the epitome of the leadership profession that we're in the armed services. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to take that, your own personal risk, and display that personal courage to those you lead, then that unit will dissolve, fall apart, and you will not accomplish the mission. It's that simple. You cannot push a unit in. You cannot inspire them from a distance. You cannot tell them how to do it on a radio. You have to physically be there. And in my service, that's 2 levels down. So during the Battle of Najaf and Hillah and Karbala, Baghdad and Mosul, that meant I was with the lead platoon in my battalion for every single contact. For them to know, I'm taking the risk with you, what we're doing is just, and follow me. That's how we do it.
That's a great point. Have you ever seen those movies where, everything's going at a regular pace and suddenly when something explodes, everything just kind of slows down? You mentioned, an aircraft crashing into the back of the ship. That happened while I was on Reagan. We had a ramp strike where an aircraft hit the back of the ship. Basically, it was kind of a ball of fire going down the angle before the pilot ejected, made it out. But I remember as it happened, I kind of stepped out of my body a little bit, and I remember thinking what a bright flame that was, just kind of going down the angle, and how it kind of lit up everything in the flight deck so nicely. And then immediately, you're right back in the action again. So you've got to be an observer of yourself in those moments. During a crisis in an aircraft, we say, if the aircraft is falling apart, the first thing you do is just wind the clock. We used to have these kind of clocks that you wind because it forces you to step back and be an observer of yourself for just a moment, and then you dive back in and you do what you're trained to do. But if you're in a leadership position and everybody around you is flailing, you can't let yourself jump into the flail, right? You can't let yourself dive into the middle of it because then you're no more useful than anyone else. If you're a leader, you stand back, you see which actions are effective, which are not, and you give clear direction, and then you let people do what they're trained to do, and then you observe and wait for the next thing to happen. So it's a strange experience when those kind of crises happen, but you've got to be an observer of yourself and kind of a director of others if you can.
Thank you.
Sir?
Ronald Carver, Royal Military College, Canada. A little different, I guess. My question's kind of two parts. With the current increased tempo in operations, along with the requirements involved in the 3-block war, the increase of OSIs or operational stress injuries are an indefinite rise. What can we do as leaders to alleviate or at least reduce the effects of it? And then also, what can we do as leaders to start getting rid of some of the stigma that goes along with some of the people suffering from the operational stress injuries?
Are you talking PTSD?
PTSD?
PTSD.
Yeah. I think the first part is to recognize it. I've been up in D.C. The Colonel and I have had a chance to go to Walter Reed, over to Bethesda, and talk to people that have gone through this. And it's not, an injured soldier is not just someone who has a visible injury. It can be something like you're talking about, post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that. And we have to, the first step is to take away the stigma that this is an actual injury. This is an actual effect of what our troops are going through there. I think you've hit on a major point, and I think it's going to have to be a national focus as all these soldiers, Marines, sailors come back from being on the front. And the first step is to acknowledge it, and the second step is to give them effective treatment.
As someone who will tell you publicly he has PTSD, I find it hard to believe that anyone who's ever found themselves Iraq, Afghanistan, Colombia, the Philippines, and any other, even Haiti in the early 90s, we went in off the USS Eisenhower, and the people who are down there today in Haiti who are seeing the devastation and the loss of life. And when you see human beings taken to the absolute, the root of what we are in terms of chemicals and body parts, I don't know anybody who couldn't claim or say or experience the symptoms of PTSD. A lot of us who have taken human life, who've done it for what they believe is the right reason, spend the rest of their life trying to figure out if in fact it was. When I talk to the National Youth Leadership Forum and other groups, or Memorial Day services, I normally state that I give up a lot of my personal rights to be a soldier, political rights and opinions that I normally can't express in public forum. But one of them I do retain is the fact that I am a religious person, I'm a Catholic, and I do believe that taking someone's life is against my faith. So I live with the fact that I'm probably going to go to hell based upon my beliefs. Where I get spun up and my PTSD kicks in is when I ask young men and women who are out there who have not earned their citizenship, what is it they're going to do to earn back my soul? What is it they're going to do as U.S. citizens to return my soul to me, or at least make good that sacrifice to them, to make themselves better citizens, and to realize that the country that we live in is so incredible. And that's what's frustrating. I worked in Congress for 2 years before this job. I was the Army Senior Liaison. And one of the facts that stuck out in my mind that bothered me the most was that for 3 years, 3 freshman classes that came into the U.S. Congress, represented 197 U.S. citizens, voted into arguably one of the most powerful nations in the history of mankind, arguably. We sent those people to Washington, D.C. to represent us in a global environment. Of those 197, only 6 possessed U.S. passports before being voted into national office. Of those 6, only 3 had stamps in their passport. Of those 3, 1 was England, 1 was France, and 1 was Kenya with 3 stamps. So essentially, 1 person in that group had been to a third world country to see how the rest of the world lives. And it's that mindset when you come back and you've gone through something like that with PTSD or any other sort of experience in the Peace Corps or humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations. You come back with that experience of the human element at its absolute worst, and then you come back into our nation, you see people who simply benefit from our forefathers without any regard to giving some sort of sacrifice or some sort of public service back. That's what makes people angry. That's what makes me angry. And that's where I wonder, my PTSD, I can keep it under control as long as I think there's somebody out there who understands that and will not just take advantage of the country that I've done that before, but participate and be a citizen of it.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
Hi, I'm Carly Potok from Lehigh University, but originally from Colorado, so go Buffs. Sorry, Nebraska. But I'm an athlete at Lehigh, and Dr. Kraus, I'm curious about your thoughts on the benefits of having a pregame routine and how that can prepare you mentally for the game versus the detriments of getting pulled into those superstitions, and if that can actually hurt your performance.
My one and only nephew is a graduate of Lehigh, so I have a special place in Lehigh. I have the sweatshirts at my house. So, you know, pregame is similar to in the military called standard operating procedure. I mean, that's what Tiger Woods is famous for in terms of his game preparation. And when I was doing a residency at the University of Arizona and I traveled with the basketball team, we had a player that had to have a banana split before the game. And if she did, she convinced herself that she couldn't play her best. And so the first thing we would do when we travel and land is the assistant coaches would scout out the closest Dairy Queen so we could get this player a banana split. And, you know, I spent a lot of time with the team explaining to them that, you know, it is okay to have certain preparations that you tend to believe fit you. There's certain coaches that wear only certain pairs of underwear when they coach against this team. There's players that have to have their iPod on a certain song while they're tying their shoes. I mean, everyone seems to have a ritual. And I am very okay with rituals because it becomes part of a standard operating behavior that allows the athlete to then be able to deal with other distractors. The dance becomes, I also have to convince them, now you do understand you can still play really good basketball without a banana split. So I do have to convince them that it is something in their mind that they like to play that mind game, and if it works, I say do it. But you have to also believe that you can play without it. So it's a dance.
Thank you very much. If we could have another large round of applause for our panelists.